Let's introduce the main characters before we start the story. We'll call the entitled neighbor En, and her spoiled son Es. There's also the previous owner of our house who we'll call Pio, but they have a small part in the story. Keep in mind that the time from when we bought the house to now is almost 15 years, so there were big gaps between most events. En tried to steal our house but got what she deserved, ending up with a $200,000 bill because of her actions. To set the stage, I need to give some background. Most of this happened before we bought and moved into the house. En owned a large piece of property down the road from a popular recreational lake in our area. While her road is the only one leading to multiple lakefront properties, resorts, and a popular boat dock, it's actually a fair distance from these places. The properties here aren't extremely expensive, so normal people can afford them. However, there are some very valuable properties further down the road with rich people driving by all the time. This will be important later. Later in the story, En, being quite wealthy and owning a large piece of land, decided to divide her property into 4 roughly equal sections when her children came of age. She gave one section to her daughter, who is surprisingly decent compared to the rest of the family. Another section went to her son Es. En built houses for both of them on these sections, roughly according to their preferences. On the 4th section, the one without her own house, she built a small convenience store. This detail will be important later. To avoid future disputes, she actually gave the deeds to her children for their respective houses and properties. You can probably see where this is going. While the daughter was pretty respectable, Es, or maybe we should call him irresponsible son, was a party maniac. Everyone in the neighborhood hated him because he threw loud, obnoxious parties almost every night, keeping everyone awake. The police were called on him so often that they apparently had someone stationed nearby. It probably didn't help that Es felt entitled because his mom paid all his bills, water, electric, garbage, everything was in her name and went to her mailbox. However, since the property was in his name, the property tax bill also went to him. He ignored it instead of giving it to En. Maybe En didn't think about it or assumed he was paying it himself. It wasn't surprising when the police showed up at his house, but it was surprising when he didn't come back and the house went up for auction. By this time, the house was a wreck. There were holes in the drywall and a huge hole in the living room floor leading down into the garage/basement. The kitchen floor and subfloor needed to be completely replaced. Almost all the walls were covered in mud. His irresponsibility and party habits have left the house in such bad shape that the banks considered it unlivable. Because of this, only people who could pay for it outright could afford it, which is where Pio comes into the story. Pio was a house flipper, but not one of the big, wealthy ones you see on TV. He did it more as a hobby. He was retired and flipped houses to keep himself busy and active. Pio would buy houses like this one super cheap at auctions, fix them up himself, and then put them back on the market. While fixing up a house, he would live off the profit from the previous house. Typically, by the time he finished one and bought the next, his profit would have almost run out. Any leftover money went into an emergency savings fund, which he said wasn't anything special. We were looking for a new place but couldn't afford anything too expensive. When we saw this house for sale on a website, it seemed perfect. It was the right size in a great neighborhood, and close to the lake where we love fishing and boating. It seemed perfect in almost every way. We were worried about the price, which wasn't listed on the website yet, but decided it wouldn't hurt to at least take a look. We drove by to see the house and found Pio working on it. We stopped to say hi and asked about the price. He explained that he was planning to fix it up and sell it, and that his realtor had added it to the website's database to make the sale process easier and more efficient when he was ready to sell. We sat down and had a nice chat with him, just being friendly, and he appreciated the company. We explained to Pio that we were willing to buy the house from him for a reasonable price, considering its current condition and the work he had already put into it. He had it about half finished. We told him we would love to finish it and live in it as our forever home. However, he turned us down, saying he already had several offers and didn't feel right selling it to us before finishing it. He told us we could buy it for the full price once he was done. We thanked him, left our number, and asked him to call us if he ever changed his mind, which he promised to do. Less than 2 weeks later, we got an unexpected call from Pio. He explained that his sister had fallen sick in another state, and he wanted to be with her. He wouldn't have enough time or patience to finish the house. He told us the house was not up to code, but if we could find a way to buy it, he'd be happy to sell it to us for a reasonable price. We happily agreed and started looking for banks. With the help of a realtor friend, we found a bank willing to loan us the money with a few conditions. We had 2 weeks to bring the house up to code, or they could default on the loan and auction it off. After explaining the situation to Pio, he offered as much help as he could. Though he couldn't do any work on the house due to his rush, he explained exactly what needed to be done to bring it up to code, the time and effort required, and the estimated costs. He even offered to help us out in another way. We took out a loan for twice the amount needed to buy the house, preparing for the work ahead. Pio sold us the house for half of what he initially wanted, giving us back the other half of the loan, which we used for repairs. With the work Pio had already done, the house was almost up to code. We could probably have managed it ourselves, but just in case, we called in a few friends and finished the work in half the time. Once it was up to code, there was still plenty to do. We spent several months replacing flooring and subflooring, rewiring, patching holes in the walls, and replacing old, decomposing wallpaper stuck directly to the drywall. We put a ton of work into the place. Finally, it was time to move into our dream home. It still had a few issues that we fixed over time, but it was ready to live in. We were still moving in when Ian came over to introduce herself. Pio had warned us about Ian and her entitled attitude during the short time we had to deal with him. At first, Ian was extremely nice and we couldn't understand why Pio had warned us about her. Then it happened. As we were wrapping up our conversation, Ian kindly and compassionately explained that our house actually belonged to her and that we had 30 days to move out. She said she felt sorry for us since we had been scammed, but that Pio had no right to sell the house to us. We were terrified. We had heard horror stories about people being scammed like this, and we feared we had lost all the time, effort, and money we had put into our dream house. We thanked Ian for explaining and being so nice and said we would talk to the bank and Pio to figure it out. We spoke to the bank who confirmed that Pio was the actual owner of the deed. We also spoke to the realtor who testified the same thing. When we talked to Pio, he explained that Ian had accused him of stealing the house multiple times after he bought it at auction and that she had harassed him constantly over the house. Everyone we spoke to had the same story. Pio was the rightful owner of the deed. We even confirmed it at the courthouse. During this process, we heard the backstory about ES from several neighbors. Ian came by not long after and asked when we would be moving out. We explained that we legally owned the property and wouldn't be moving. We sympathized with her loss but explained it wasn't our fault and we weren't going to give up the property we bought with our own money and worked hard to fix up. Ian then launched into a long sob story about how the property had been in her family for generations and how Pio had supposedly stolen it from them. We asked why they didn't bid for the house back when it was auctioned, especially since we bought it from Pio for only about $50,000, still making a small profit for him. Ian claimed they felt the house was being stolen from them and refused to pay for something that rightfully belonged to them. We apologized again but explained we wouldn't take a loss on the property, especially after all the time, effort, and money we put into it. However, we offered to sell it to Ian for a very reasonable price, $100,000, which was just over half of its total market value. After buying it from Pio for $50,000 and putting an additional $30,000 into materials, plus several months of hard labor, we felt it was fair. We even hinted we could go down to $90,000 if she negotiated. Ian immediately countered with $40,000, saying she shouldn't have to pay anything for something that rightfully belonged to her. When we refused, she offered $50,000, claiming she'd throw in an extra $10,000 for the work we did. When we explained we bought it for $50,000, she called us liars and thieves, even insulting our dream home by calling it a dump. After all the effort and money we put into the house, we were fed up with Anne's nonsense. We kindly asked her to leave, making it clear she wasn't welcome anymore and we'd never sell to her even if she offered double the market value. She got upset and insulted us as she left. Later, we found out she was spreading rumors about us stealing the house. Then, a guy we'd heard of but never met pulled into our driveway with a gun, threatening us to leave. He considered himself the peacekeeper of the neighborhood, confronting troublemakers. Most people liked him because he kept things peaceful, especially in the more rural and less law-abiding part of the neighborhood. Our neighborhood is split into two sections, one with mostly retired people where it's peaceful, and the other with more lawless types deeper into the wilderness. We live on the edge of the peaceful part, separated by some woodland and farmland. Assuming this guy was the peacekeeper everyone talked about, we decided to test our hypothesis. We told him we had no idea what was going on, invited him in for a beer and chat, and allowed him to bring his gun, though he brought ours too. In our town, almost everyone has a gun, so it wasn't a big concern for us. Absolutely, having a gun is often seen as a way of saying, hey, I'm capable of defending myself if needed. But if someone pointed it at you, that would be a different story. Back to the main story. After a few hours of chatting and explaining the situation, Mr. Peacekeeper apologized for the misunderstanding. He got caught up in the rumors but realized his mistake. He thanked us for buying the house, saying everyone was happier since Edith moved out. We had a good laugh about it afterward, and he left without saying another word. Now, let's talk about why Mr. Peacekeeper believed the rumors so easily. This is a bit of a side story, but a major turning point. The events of this side story overlap a little with the next part of the story, but let's dive in. Ian split off a quarter of her property to build a convenience store. This store was extremely popular in the neighborhood because of its location right in the middle. It wasn't popular for its prices. They overcharged for everything, or its customer service, which mostly consisted of a simple thank you for your purchase as you left. Sometimes they'd give refunds if you found mold on the food you bought, though. But despite these drawbacks, they were popular because they were the only convenience store for miles. If you needed groceries and didn't want to drive all the way to town, they were just a hop and a skip away for most people. Despite our differences, we shopped at Anne's store many times. It was right next door after all. The store's popularity built up a positive reputation in the neighborhood. Everyone wanted to keep their convenient little store and dared anyone to try and take it from them. People tended to trust Ian and her family, so when she started spreading rumors, people listened. The rumor about us stealing her entire house was deemed ridiculous and blown off, but smaller rumors gained traction. When Anne's son, E.S., got out of prison, she allowed him to move back in. She rented him an apartment above her convenience store and forbade wild parties on her property. He didn't have to pay rent, just run the store when needed. However, E.S. continued his dishonest practices, often double charging customers and pocketing the extra money. When we brought this to Anne's attention, she dismissed us, even though it was obvious. We shared the information with our friends, and while they didn't all believe it, the word spread quickly. Mr. Peacekeeper visited us again, this time much friendlier. Mr. Peacekeeper mostly ignored the rumors about us, knowing most were fake. We chatted with him several times since then, mostly on friendly terms. He'd stop by for a beer and chat about neighborhood happenings, asking our opinions on things. He did this with everyone, speaking to most people at least once a year to keep things calm. He didn't like the idea of police hanging around, so he made sure everything stayed peaceful. Everyone, including us, liked this arrangement. However, he didn't like the rumors we spread about our neighbors and their store. He'd already talked to them, and they said it was just a misunderstanding due to register issues. If we didn't want trouble, we had to stop those rumors then and there. We wanted to show him proof, but we knew he probably wouldn't believe it. He generally trusted Ian and would take her word over ours. Since they dismissed it as a register error, there was likely nothing we could do to convince him. So we agreed, apologized for any issues, and explained we just felt wronged and wanted to protect our few friends in the neighborhood. He accepted the apology, gave us a final warning, and left. After that, we decided to stop shopping there unless absolutely necessary. But everything changed after a couple more years after we pointed out the issue and the rumors spread around the neighborhood. Despite Mr. Peacekeeper's efforts to debunk them, the rumors were seen as a result of our property feud with Ian. But I'll get to that. Later on, people started paying more attention to their receipts after shopping at Anne's store and noticed the same patterns we had. Over time, ES probably pocketed significant amounts of money, and Ian likely knew but chose to ignore it and silence people with rumors. Small country stores like theirs depend heavily on regular customers from the neighborhood. They make good profits during the warmer months but struggle in the winter. Then Mr. Peacekeeper finally connected the dots and got furious. He confronted ES and Ian, cursing them out, and then went door to door, informing everyone in the neighborhood about their wrongdoing. He even took receipts as proof. Mr. Peacekeeper was the most trusted person in the neighborhood, so his words carried weight. Within 24 hours, he ruined their business. People stopped coming to the store, and after 2 winters of losses, they had to close for the winter months. Eventually, they closed the store permanently. Their downfall improved our reputation in the neighborhood. People stopped ignoring us, and we were able to make friends more easily. However, this was just the beginning of Anne's downfall. She was extremely nosy, always watching our every move. We wanted to put up a privacy fence for our pool and hot tub but informed Ian out of courtesy. She adamantly rejected the idea, but we offered to discuss the details with her to find a solution. We still strive to be the best neighbors despite everything Ian has put us through. Going back to the story, we wanted to avoid disputes over the fence location, so we planned to place it a foot over our property line to ensure clarity. Before Ian got out of jail, we obtained a copy of the deed and a map of our property lines from the courthouse. To our surprise, about a third of our property was being claimed by Ian, with a shed and garden on it. There's a line of trees running through our property, creating a triangular section, which Ian claimed as hers on the other side of the trees. When we brought this up with her, she freaked out, calling us liars and thieves. We were too bothered by it because we had assumed it was hers. To simplify things, we offered to sell it to her or trade it for a portion of her property, which would benefit both parties. However, she flatly refused, claiming it already belonged to her and accusing us of stealing it. Since then, a significant property dispute has arisen between us. Where I live, property lines are often unclear due to rural areas and old deeds describing landmarks that may have disappeared over time. This, along with the potential for small portions of property to be valuable, has led to strict laws and regulations regarding property disputes and surveys. Are mysteriously disappearing overnight? Well, I'll leave that little detail for later. Anyway, with Anne's interference, it's been challenging to find a surveyor willing to work on our property. Plus, the laws in our state are stringent regarding surveyors' responsibilities and penalties for any mistakes or misconduct. Even an honest mistake can cost a surveyor their license and a significant fine, not to mention potential lawsuits from affected clients. So, it's no surprise that surveyors are cautious, especially when a property dispute is involved. Unfortunately, before we could find a surveyor willing to work with us, Ian seemed to have already enlisted one. However, the survey wasn't entirely accurate, conveniently leaving out the fact that our property extended almost to her house, a detail she probably omitted when briefing the surveyor. Ian's knack for subtly dissuading surveyors from working with us has further complicated the situation. Every time we find a potential surveyor, she manages to scare them off by hinting at the possibility of a property dispute. It's frustrating, to say the least, but we're determined to resolve this issue and protect our property rights. To follow up after the deadline passed, and surprisingly, they didn't press the matter further. It seemed they had realized the validity of our claim and chose not to pursue legal action. This incident was a stark reminder of the ongoing property dispute with Ian and the lengths she would go to cause trouble. It also highlighted the importance of resolving the property line issue once and for all. With the stakes so high in Ian's interference, finding a reliable surveyor willing to work with us remained a daunting task. Despite the challenges, we remained determined to protect our property rights and put an end to Anne's schemes once and for all. The storm incident served as a wake-up call, prompting us to redouble our efforts to resolve the dispute and safeguard our home and land. Gradually with our dogs, but it seemed like they were more interested in testing the boundaries. So, after a few weeks of training, we decided to let them out and see how they did. Surprisingly, they caught on quickly, and now they roam around the property without any issues, staying well within the boundaries of the invisible fence. It's been a great solution for keeping them safe while still allowing them the freedom to explore. Overall, despite the ongoing property dispute and the challenges it presents, we're grateful for the support of our neighbors and the resilience of our dogs. We'll continue to navigate the situation with patience and determination, knowing that in the end, what matters most is protecting our home and the life we've built here. We wanted to let our dogs play freely in our yard instead of keeping them indoors all day. However, we couldn't afford a proper fence yet. So, we marked our property with temporary barriers. These weren't very sturdy, and we placed them well inside our property line to keep our dogs away from the neighbor's area. One day, our neighbor accidentally ran over these markers with her lawnmower, even though they were clearly inside our property line. Her lawnmower got wrecked because it got tangled in the wires we had set up. She had to buy a new lawnmower because of her actions. Despite her trying to spread rumors, it was obvious that she was at fault. She never asked us to compensate her for the mower, probably knowing we wouldn't take responsibility. It's a funny story because she couldn't blame us for something clearly her fault. Stay tuned for more stories, including one about how my mom's actions led to her department shutting down, costing the company a lot of money. But that's a story for another time. Good night.